AI Realized, the podcast about everything that is new, now, and next for enterprise executives deploying AI. Hosted by myself, Christina Elwood, and my collaborator, David Yakubovich.
Our guests will share what's driving AI adoption, use cases, and business models for the data and AI economy.
Why the future is bright. Why the future is bright.
Welcome to AI Realized podcast for enterprise executives leading AI deployments. From addressing security data and operations challenges to managing the organizations and management changes, AI deployment presents the opportunity to redesign our organizations from the inside out. I'm your host today, Christina Elwood, and we are talking with Steve Jones, the Executive Vice President of Data-Driven Business and Generative AI at Capgemini. Steve, welcome to AI Realized.
Thank you very much, Christina. Pleasure to be here.
Steve, deploying AI to production is predicted to take off in a big way in 2025, by some estimates to the level of 35% versus 5% today. What are some of the issues in managing AI in production?
I think it's a really great question. I'll say, I have to shout it is from a Capgemini perspective. Our first Gen AI solution went live in 2021. So we've been doing this a little bit longer. So we've probably got a few more in. So a few more lessons of the scars and ribbons of what it takes to get these things into production. I think the single biggest problem is that the POC problem, which is Gen AI is a technology that there has never been in the history of tech somewhere it's easier to do a POC. You can just go into ChatGPT and say, pretend you are a bank clerk and you're trying to sell a mortgage product to a customer. And ChatGPT will create a realistic sounding interaction for that challenge. That won't integrate back to any risk profiling or management or rate calculations or any of those pieces. But in just a few seconds, it looks like it might work. The gap between that first stage POC and the reality is where I think a lot of things have broken down, because we're used to the idea that we do a POC and it's not, it might only be 15% of the way there, but we know the other 85%. With Gen AI, it's probably only 2% of the way there, and we don't know 90% of the next steps that actually will get us there, because governing it and operating it is the problem. That, I think, is going to be the real push in 2025. It's been a focus for us in 2024, and I think one of the reasons why Forrester ranked us in the leaders group alongside BCG was this very fact that we've concentrated on what it takes to get stuff into production. Rather than the POC, concentrating on production and getting things live is really what's important. And I think the shift of that is that mentality of we're not interested in whether the technology can do X. We're interested in whether we can get X into production using the technology, and they're not the same question.
Are you feeling optimistic that there will be a big surge in production deployments in 2025, or are you somewhat more sanguine about it?
I think from our perspective at Capgemini is we've already got a lot in production. So I'm pretty confident that we're going to have a hell of a lot in production in 2025. I think the piece generally we have as an industry challenge is the lack of focus on operations. People who continue to just focus on the solution and the hype and hoping the solution works and hoping the solution is reliable are never going to get there. So I think we're definitely going to see an uptick, because we've got a lot of people this year who've gone through that POC, who've gone through the pain of, oh my God, there's so much effort to get in. And we talk about it in terms of maturity. Is POCs are basically maturity -1 for Gen AI. They don't get you anywhere. You've got to focus first on build maturity. And when you've got one or two solutions where you've got them into production, you understand the build, you'll very quickly begin to realize that operate maturity is where you need to focus. So I really do have a hope that a lot of companies have begun to establish their build maturity in 2024. So they'll get a few solutions in. And what we'll really begin to see that'll accelerate it is as they concentrate in the operate maturity in 2025.
That's really interesting. And with all of the hype about agents, Do you think that they are going to disrupt this move to production, or do you think they'll just go into POC and the productions will go forward without being affected by the agentic move?
I think the agentic move, there's two parts of it. One is that for a given solution, agentic might be a really great way to do it, and we need to be clear what we mean by when we say agentic. So the simple pieces in terms of chain of thought, in terms of planning, in terms of those sorts of pieces that for something like knowledge management, agentic is going to make a huge improvement over just single LLM and RAG solutions. So there, it's going to definitely accelerate. When we start talking about more complicated problems where people are beginning to ask, how do I get agents to talk to each other? And I have quite a funny thing. About 5 weeks ago, I wrote something at work where I said, within 2 quarters, we're going to have people asking us how to integrate agents from multiple different vendors on multiple platforms. And that's going to be a really big problem. 3 weeks after writing that, somebody asked me exactly that question. And I think that's the thing I would say is that the piece of agentic is, I think agentic within the scope of single solutions, in certain places it's going to help. In other places it's going to be irrelevant in single solutions. But where agentic's really going to have the shift is as it starts moving to the next piece, which is I've got one bot doing knowledge management around my products. I've got another bot that I've built that's a little bit more agentic that's doing some supplier or sales negotiation. Now I want the sales negotiation bot to speak to my product bot to work out the right product to fit for a given customer request. That's where things get a whole lot more interesting and a whole lot more complicated. But if you haven't got those base foundations done, if you haven't industrialized and governed those base pieces correctly, you're really not going to be able to make it to the second bit. So I think agentic is definitely going to help in certain places, as long as people realize that it isn't a panacea, it isn't magic, and it needs a greater degree of governance than just RAG plus an LLM.
Yeah, it's even curious to me to think about how do the agents get access to data or access to controlled processes and so forth. Like you're talking about this doing a quote or pricing for, you don't want to get the wrong information in their hands. You don't want it to end up in a competitor's hands. You don't want to end up obligating yourself to a contract that's not appropriate. So it seems like there's a lot of places to go wrong in using agents in that way. So what are good use cases for agents today? And where should someone really take pause before they start to focus on agents in maybe these more corner cases?
I'll start the first piece. The first piece is where absolutely not to go right now is I'm going to automate the entire area of my business purely using agents. Tell me your company and I will make sure that all your money goes into my pockets because it will be able to be hacked and broken. So start small. And around start small, it's decompose the problem. So an agent getting it wrong isn't fatal. One of the mistakes people make is they start thinking, I can give this one LLM solution, this one agent, access to 50 different tools. I can give it all of these little pieces and it will decide which one to use. And I'll just give you a silly example that I use. To teach myself these pieces, I write some code around some trail cam image processing out here in Arizona. And what's been really interesting when you give it the tools is if you have one solution that tries to do multiple things, 9 times out of 10 or 4 times out of 5, it does what I wanted. The problem is the 5th time, it went into an infinite loop, which if I hadn't been running it locally, would have cost me a huge amount of money. And then another time in that the 5th time out of 5, and so 8 times out of 10 on the 10th time, it decided to go and use the tools completely incorrectly. It did copies before it got its planning all wrong. So what I've had to do is I've decomposed the problem further and I've gone, no, this bit, I know how to do this bit. You know what? I'm not going to let the AI decide. So I'm going to model out the right way to do that because I've been doing this for a long time. This other bit, to be honest, I don't care quite so much, and I'm really interested in how the capabilities of the LLMs can be used in this space. So I'm going to allow you to plan out that part of the solution. But this part I'm going to do myself because that's my cost management part. So I think the real piece is start thinking about how you decompose problems, how you say this agent has access to these tools. And you made a great example in terms of what the boundaries are. So if I had, for instance, a sales bot and an inventory management bot, or a product catalog, an inventory management bot is a good example. I don't want it that if a person speaks to the inventory management bot, a salesperson speaks to them, I know they're not just going to release all of my inventory to whoever they're talking to. But if there's a sales management bot, somebody could build a script that interacts with my sales management bot and potentially rips off my entire inventory infrastructure. That's a big issue. So I need to not only think about what agent has access to, I need to think about what agents have access to that, and therefore what information chain, supply chain, I actually have as a result, and how I prevent the sorts of things I'm talking about happening. So decomposing the problem and understanding the risk and understanding combinatorial risk is really how you need to start thinking in agentic. It's not about one great big model that has access to a billion tools that you trust to do your business. There's some wonderful examples out there of people who've done these pieces in experimentation, and it was one where somebody was like, it was great, it worked out that it didn't have enough compute capacity, so it was able to break outside and add itself more compute capacity inside my cloud environment. Isn't this clever? And all I was thinking was, no, that's not clever. If I'm a business, that I wake up in the morning and find out you've just spent $4 million worth of compute capacity because you were finding a problem a little bit hard. It's really important to decompose the problem so it can be governed and managed, and just do it piece by piece. Build something, make it work, understand combinatorial risk, model your business in a way you can trust AI to do it.
That reminds me of some of the early days of cloud. Would I be right, Steve, in thinking that really well understood and bounded things like a machine that only has certain things it can do are a better case for an agent? If like a physical machine would be a better case because it has a deterministic set of things it can do, and it has a body of knowledge that, or a body of data that could tell you if something is wrong, if something is being gone wrong, and it's instrumented to send alarms on its own. So is that a better place to, is that the kind of parameters that you would think to use?
I'd actually say that's a great example of where not to use it, what would be an LLM agentic. That doesn't mean it couldn't be considered an agent. What I mean by that is an AI that controls a robot that is working with a defined area, with a defined performance characteristics and those pieces, is a great example of exactly what I'm doing on the trail cam. I've got some pieces where I use YOLO and I use some filtering and to identify of the tens of thousands of images, which ones have a high probability of having an animal in them. That's all I'm looking for, right? Now, I could ask an LLM to do every single one of those things, and it's bounded. I'm looking just for animals, but it costs me a fortune to process all of those images, whereas I know that YOLO is going to do the best first stage filter. So the actual piece is to say is, this part of this agentic system, the robotic side, I'm going to use a more traditional, more driven API governed approach because I don't want it stepping outside. On top of that, I may well put an LLM. There's great examples of this where people have talked about using LLMs to play against stockfish at chess. And what's hilarious about it is stockfish is a great example of that sort of robotic area. It works within a defined area. It only makes moves that are valid. The LLM starts making moves that don't exist to try and beat stockfish. Now, that's what you don't want happening in that space. That's a great example. So I think it's a great question. It's actually, if you've got something that's like play chess really well, you probably don't want to use an LLM solution. You might still want an agent within an AI system, but you say this agent actually isn't an LLM agent. It's a more, quote, traditional AI optimized for that problem. I'm using LLMs over here, say for the planning and strategy parts.
I see. Okay. So I think of agents as, I'm still in the area here of exploring use cases with you. I think of agents as having different types of purposes, like an agent helping a person using an agent, talking to an agent, a system that's built for agents to operate with each other in some kind of complex. So I think of them as having these different. Is there a use case for the enterprise now? Is there a use case in that area, like agents helping people, that has lower hanging fruit than others?
Oh, there's definitely. If you look at agents around knowledge management as an example, there's a great example that Bruce Fairley inside Capg gave a couple of weeks ago, which was using agents to do support around academic paper research in the medical sphere, which huge amounts of papers, looking at cohort sizes, looking at obviously diseases, looking at topical pieces, and using an agent to say, this is what I want to do. The agent, first thing it does is creates a plan. I've got access to all of these papers. I need to find, the first thing I need to do is I know that I only need to be dealing with papers that deal with this sort of disease. So I'm only looking for papers that talk about that disease. I'm looking at these sort of demographics around it. I'm looking at recency because that's one of the questions. And then one of the questions is cohort sizes. So I'm not looking ones which are small cohorts, I'm looking large cohorts. So it built out a plan, and it was able to do that and come back with a set of pieces, with citations, with all those areas, and find that information much better than just a straight Gen AI solution would have been able to. Because the Gen AI solution would have risked hallucinating because it wouldn't have done that first stage filter, for instance. There's a great example of where agentic pieces can definitely do things around, for instance, when you're looking at combinatorial ones where you're saying, I want an agent that's really good at pulling information out of an invoice, and then a separate one that's enabling customers to ask for information about their own invoices. So I've got two separate agents, two separate problems, but they work together to solve it. That's the thing I would say, that sort of there's so many different types of agentic solutions and agent-based solutions that you can almost end up saying everything's agentic. But pieces that have that planning-based approach are definitely one that's low-hanging fruit in the enterprise. Ones where you can be very clear that how you wrap the tools. So you say, for instance, you say, this is a tool that your robot example, but I want somebody to be able to speak to it, to be able to ask it to manufacture things, and I need to be able to do a 3D printer as an example. So the thing that controls a 3D printer is descriptive. The lookup of your 3D models might be through a RAG, and the agent then creates the plan that then submits that to the 3D printer so people can ask for those pieces. There's a lot of solutions where agentic will definitely add new capabilities. The one thing I'd say about the phrase low-hanging fruit is governing and managing agentic solutions is not easy. It's harder than just LLMs on their own. Their risk profile and their instability profile is higher. So if you can't manage just a single LLM RAG solution, then an agentic solution will not be low-hanging fruit for you.
Now, I know Capgemini builds agents for clients, and you also mentioned that there are vendors that have agents that people can use. Do you think there'll be like marketplaces of agents, and enterprises will become masters of writing agents and also use third-party experts to do that?
Oh, 100%. I think if you take something, let's take an area out of bounds of I am not a lawyer, but I've been involved in loads and loads of contract reviews, as I'm sure everybody has, where there's a lawyer on and a lot of the stuff is mechanistic. A lot of those pieces, could I see legal firms creating bots that then you subcontract out some of these first stage reviews? 100%. Can I see organizations creating that today do things like invoice processing, saying today we're doing that using people, tomorrow we're going to provide you a digital employee? And that does mean, yes, as a business, I need to start thinking about the fact that in future, some of the things that I'm subcontracting and outsourcing to people through a BPO or whatever, or some of the things my own staff are doing, I might be hiring somebody in who's a digital employee, so somebody using the abstract term, to do that task. So yes, I think there's definitely going to be people selling those pieces. There's going to be a need, therefore, to govern it, because you have to think is, if I'm deploying a digital employee, is it that you're sending all of your invoice data or all your contract data to me now? Or is it that actually I need to put my digital employee and live it within your organization? And I think both are going to have to happen. And that second one of, for a digital employee to really become collaborative, like today when people employ Capgemini. When people employ Capgemini, our employees go and work on site with the client alongside their teams. That's easy to do with people. We're going to have to learn how to do that with digital employees. So I think it's definitely going to happen, but I have no magic wand that says how yet.
There's so much here that to learn and to master. What resources do you recommend to listeners who want to learn more about you and about Capgemini and the work that you're doing in this area of enterprise AI?
First thing I would say for me is go on LinkedIn. Follow me on LinkedIn. I post almost everything. Capgemini's Data and AI is also on LinkedIn. And the other one I have to shout out is Capgemini Research Institute, a thing that everybody should do if they're interested in the impact on business and the impact on the enterprise. Capgemini Research Institute is a very highly regarded research piece, and they've done a whole load of investigation into what the business impact is of Gen AI in terms of the future and what the impact of agentic will be. Follow me on LinkedIn. I'm an author on a lot of those papers, and go and do some research, because it will give you numbers to go back into your organization to be able to say, this is why we need to care, because this will change our business.
Excellent. As we wrap up, what would you like listeners to take away from our conversation today?
I think the thing to say is that AI will change your business. AI will change your industry. That doesn't mean it's about one great big model in the sky and the foundation model vendors will understand your business better than you. Because if they do, you have no business, and I don't believe that's going to happen. So actually what you need to start thinking about is they're a tool, and they're only become useful if you're able to describe your business in a way that you can control AI to do these tasks. Start thinking about AI as part of your team, as an employee, as a digital worker, not as a back-end IT system. That's the number one thing people should be thinking about right now, is AI lives in the business. It doesn't live in IT.
Aha, okay, good. That's great advice. So thank you, Steve Jones, Executive VP of Data and Data-Driven Business and Generative AI at Capgemini. Thank you for talking with me today on AI Realized and for sharing your wisdom with our enterprise executive audience. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Christina. It's been a pleasure.